Hello and welcome to today's Valto webinar in which I'm going to be talking to you about where to store your documents either in SharePoint or Microsoft Teams. My name is Dougie Wood and I'm a solution architect here at Valto, but I'm also a Microsoft MVP that specialises in document management solutions. The reason why I'm doing this webinar today is because I've always been asked this question about where to store documents, and even if the question is not being asked, when I'm engaging with clients and looking at their Microsoft 365 tenants, I can see examples of where documents are being stored in all different places where they shouldn't really be, whether it be documents that should be being collaborated on or they're being published as a kind of single source of truth for everyone to access. They can be stored in the wrong locations and it's limiting the reach and the accessibility of what that document should be. So in this webinar, what we're going to do is answer that age-old question of where to store your documents. And we're going to talk about SharePoint, what is SharePoint, the benefits of SharePoint, what is Microsoft Teams, the benefits of Teams, when you should be using Teams. And I'm also going to briefly touch on OneDrive because although the webinar title would have got a bit long if I said SharePoint versus Teams versus OneDrive, it is also going to play a vital part in where the documents are stored. So you'll also understand that by the end of this webinar. So let's dive in and start off by talking about and understanding what is SharePoint. So SharePoint is a web-based content management platform. It's not actually just about files, but it is essentially for storing files. It's also about storing things like news articles, events, and creating an intranet portal. It's essentially a centralized document storage and sharing platform. So think of it as a place where you would likely store documents which are for everybody in your organization to access. And it facilitates an efficient teamwork and communication. So we're going to talk a little bit how SharePoint relates to Teams, and you probably already kind of know the fact that SharePoint is actually behind Microsoft Teams. It just serves it up in a different way. So it's also facilitating the teamwork which comes along with Microsoft Teams, but I'll talk a bit more about that later on. And it offers up a robust version control and access management. So version control, like having documents with version 1, version 2, version 3, it provides all of that, as well as access management. So you can control who has access to different areas of your intranet. So you might say, for example, have intranet owners or even delegated owners from different departments, like HR might own the kind of policies and things like that. Or you might have marketing team who own things like templates and branding kits and things like that people would want to access. And SharePoint is that single source of truth, that platform in which you can put all of these resources so people can easily access them. On top of all of that, SharePoint is integrated seamlessly with the Microsoft Office suite. So when we're talking about things like Word, PowerPoint, Excel, even OneNote, you can create these files directly inside of SharePoint. And we'll take a little bit of a look at that later on. It also allows you to build information as a sharing intranet portal. So as I say, it's something that could be for internal use, but also could be external. We're going to talk a bit about that later on as well. Now, one thing I think which is a bit unfair of SharePoint in this day and age is that there are still some people that believe there's a reputation of SharePoint being boring and clunky and ugly. And I want to kind of disprove that because actually Microsoft have done a lot of work to make SharePoint look much better, more of a modern website, more engaging. It looks nice and slick. So there's a lot of work that's gone into what they call the modern experience of SharePoint, which will debunk all that kind of reputation of SharePoint being boring and clunky. I just won't have it that is the case with SharePoint anymore. It really is a much more user-friendly experience. So when we're thinking about SharePoint then, so from a kind of intranet perspective, so when I'm talking about SharePoint, I'm talking about the kind of intranet, the communication sites which come along with SharePoint. So what are the types of documents that we're storing there? So an intranet, and I love this phrase, I'm going to say it all the time, single source of truth. It's the place where when there's a new starter, you can point them in the direction of the intranet and say, go and have a look at this. This is where you're going to find our policies. This is where you're going to find all the things you need to do your job. It's a single source of truth, and it stops things like things floating around in emails or Teams messages and things like that of, where was that policy on X, Y, and Z, or things like that. So it provides that kind of centralized platform that you can get that information from. The documents that you're storing in the SharePoint intranet are documents you're not actively collaborating on. And this is a very key fundamental thing to understand, to distinguish between when you're putting documents in a SharePoint intranet platform and when you're putting them inside of Microsoft Teams. It's whether or not you're going to be collaborating on them. That's, to be honest, if you could take anything away from this webinar, that is the fundamental truth, is distinguishing between, am I going to be working on this actively, or am I going to be publishing it for people to access? And that is where we're distinguishing between SharePoint is the kind of publishing platform and Teams is the collaborating platform. So again, it's final versions of documents. It's not kind of like drafts or something like that. It's something that you want people to easily be able to access and find as the latest version. So some quick examples then of the types of documents you can expect to find in a SharePoint intranet portal. So company-wide policies and procedures, of course, making it nice and easy for staff to find out what they should be doing. Newsletters and announcements. So I've come across it in the past before where things like PDFs and things like that of newsletters are floating around. In reality, wearing my kind of SharePoint hat, you should be using the news web parts inside of SharePoint instead of creating PDFs. But I still do see people creating PDFs instead of using the news function, but they should still live on your SharePoint intranet portal. And then you can use web parts like the highlighted content web part to surface them in a nice kind of user-friendly way. Press releases, media kits, again, coming back to that marketing point, anything that you're kind of giving out to maybe your sales team to use for sort of presentations, things like that, making sure it's nice and easy for them to access those kind of materials. And you don't want it that people have got maybe what the sales team have got a copy of something living in their Microsoft team, like a presentation or something like that, a master copy, because then the marketing team, if they don't have access to that, or the creative team that pushes out this type of content, they'll be putting out new versions of it, and yet you'll still find somebody in sales or whoever's chosen to hide a version of that inside of their Microsoft team, which isn't the true master copy. They're using that old version, and they're just not getting the benefits of the new document that's being created. So other things as well, like event calendars and schedules, again, realistically, should be in the SharePoint platform. You should be using the built-in calendars, the event web parts, and things like that. Executive communications and updates. Again, this, to be fair, is a little bit on the fence because I've seen it work well in both camps in terms of a SharePoint intranet. That works really well as a kind of platform, especially if you're introducing things like video through Stream. So rather than having a big waffly email or something like that coming from your C-suite, your CEO, or whoever it might be, they could record a little video, even on their phone as they're walking between meetings or out and about, and they're wanting to summarize what's going on that kind of month. They could record a couple of minute video and they could post it into a SharePoint news article, or they could have somebody push it out on their behalf for them. I've also seen the exact same thing done before with Microsoft Teams, but you have to be careful in the fact that you probably want to use what they call an org-wide team. So rather than a team which is locked down behind multiple doors and it's a department-specific team or a project-specific team, you could have a org-wide team and just make it so that only certain people can post into it. And then you could post something like that type of content in there. But as I say, it's a fine line, and it works for some and not for others. Department resources and guidelines. So again, this starts to get a little bit grey in terms of like what people understand as this, and I try and explain that there's actually department specific resources and content which a department creates, some of which, well, most of which, 80% of which will be almost in-house within the department. So let's take finance, for example. They'll be working on budgets and spreadsheets and all sorts of good stuff, and that will be internal use, and that will be what's stored inside their Microsoft team. But they're also serving up hot and fresh some other materials which are for a whole organization. So things like expense request templates or in an Excel spreadsheet or something like that, they will be maintaining the published version of that, or putting out financial forecasts so that the whole company can see, or how did the company do in the past 12 months. Any of these types of things, they're putting out that information, not on a daily, weekly, or maybe even monthly basis, but they are putting out and publishing content. So they would have a SharePoint site as part of the intranet, which we call a department site, and they're pushing out that type of materials about where to find the latest expense request form, how the financial figures are looking, what the forecast for next year looks like, all those types of kind of information. As a finance department, they would have a SharePoint site to put that out. Also, training materials and resources. Again, sometimes they fall under the departments, or maybe there's a L&D, learning development type of SharePoint site, which is also set up. But again, that would be the best place for that is on a SharePoint site as part of the intranet, because then everyone can have access to it and it's not locked down in anywhere particular. Publicly accessible reports and documents, as I say, give an example there of finance putting out reports and things like that, but anything that's publicly accessible needs to be inside of the SharePoint intranet. But you could also think about things which are like archived or historical documents and things like that. And actually, you might want to spin up like an archive SharePoint site where you can store things which maybe lived on a file server somewhere or something like that. And it might not necessarily be directly related to a department or needs to collaborate on it or chat around it. So it makes sense just to be a standalone SharePoint site. Frequently used templates and forms. Again, it kind of comes under this kind of SharePoint site where, again, everyone needs to be able to access the latest type of form or template or something like that. So making it publicly, well, I say publicly, but you know what I mean, accessible for the whole organization. Another key one as well that sometimes not everyone's aware of that SharePoint will do is the ability to have external SharePoint sites. So maybe if it's for a partner or a vendor or a customer or subcontractors or something like that, you can provide a SharePoint site. And if you're just wanting kind of like a one-way street, so you're just wanting to give them information, or you just want them to drop off documents, you can give it to them via SharePoint site. Now, you could argue you could create a Microsoft team for that as well, but you should only really do that if you need the chat functionality and the conversations and things like that which go along with it. Sometimes it's just a kind of like, this is our partner portal, go here and download our kind of partner portal documents and files and things like that, and you don't really want the kind of interaction, you don't want the two-way street, you don't want questions to be answered, because again, although it sounds great, in reality, you've got to make sure that you've got the backup of somebody's actually checking that Microsoft team, if partners are asking questions into that team, that someone's actually answering them. Because again, if you offer up a service for someone to have a chat with you and you don't go back to them, they're going to have a terrible time. They're going to have a bad experience and it's going to reflect poorly on your organization. So just having that SharePoint site, which is a one-way sort of like channel of pushing out information to a SharePoint site that people can collect, can cut down on that. So it sounds like you kind of shooting yourself in the foot that you're missing a feature, but actually you could be doing yourself a disservice if you open up a team and you're not using it properly for conversations and collaboration, then it's going to have a worse experience. So high-level department reports and summaries, again, coming back to this concept of a department site. So you've got departments pushing out information, it's putting that out there. Company-wide surveys, feedbacks, collection forms, anonymous, whistleblowing, any of those types of things, again, are great to actually put inside of a SharePoint site. Community or employee engagement initiatives, employee handbooks, onboarding materials. In fact, onboarding is such an important thing nowadays, and I bang on about this all the time, but SharePoint is a real game changer for that. So you can have like a pre-onboarding using that external sharing that we talked about before. So before an employee has even joined your organization, you could send them a SharePoint site to say, go here, and you'll be able to kind of see what our company is about, provide us key documents, complete some tasks we need to complete, all these sort of things, blah, blah, before they've even joined. So you're keeping them sticky, you're keeping that retention rate high, and you're not losing them during that kind of recruitment process. Customer-facing FAQs, it doesn't have to be customer-facing, just be FAQs in general. Again, they work quite well internally. So rather than, I've seen SharePoint severely reduce the amount of administration time that it takes for especially departments to answer questions that they get emailed or Teams messaged about or phone calls or things like that, which are very repetitive, they're frequently asked. So having a SharePoint site, especially a department SharePoint site, where they can list out all their FAQs, a nice little kind of list, means that you can bounce people to that first as the first port of call, and if they can't find the answer, then they escalate it, and then you give them the contact information to contact you. It's also about providing things like a centralized event photos and galleries and pictures of your staff and happy times, Christmas parties, summer parties, whatever it is. You can store those photos on there as well. So again, it can help build up that kind of sense of belonging and knowing what's going on, and especially as part of that onboarding process, having some of those kind of things available, again, can keep people sticky and think, oh, this looks like a great place to work. Best practice guides, building up knowledge bases, knowledge repositories, all that sort of stuff. Again, SharePoint, it's the SharePoint's bread and butter, right? That's what it does. So those are all the kind of times when, if you've got any of the kind of documents or information that fits under those types of camps, obviously there's loads more, but I was just trying to brain dump a bunch of things which I know that SharePoint intranets get used for, to help you distinguish between what you should be using SharePoint for and what you should be using Microsoft Teams for. So I know I've been on that slide for quite a long time, but I'm now just going to transition to this next one, which is about key features of SharePoint for document storage. So we've talked about when and why you should use SharePoint, but what are the key features of SharePoint? So why would you be using SharePoint as your document storage area? So as I mentioned, version control. So I'm just going to bring my mouse over here. So you can see these versions here, which is just, this is a SharePoint site called Control Documents, and we've got our documents in here. You can see version numbers. We can have both major and minor versions. So you can have whole numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can have draft minor versions as well, so 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and at the point that you publish that document, it increments to the next version number. We can have access controls and permissions. So we can actually say, okay, well, these people from the quality management team have got access to all of the policy documents, and can edit them or upload them and create new ones, but only those people can do that. Everyone else in the organization has read-only access, so they can just go there and consume that information. And if you're interested in actually building out a control document system and policy management, that sort of stuff, again, let us know. You've probably seen we've got videos on, we've got pre-built systems for this. If this kind of tickles your fancy, then do let us know, and we can set up a demonstration of that for you. Access control, was talked about that, so we can limit those down. Collaborative tools, so it means that you can kind of have these policies inside of SharePoint, and it means that you can then work on that individual document. So although when we talk about collaboration, we typically talk about Microsoft Teams being the collaboration tool where you're going backwards and forwards and things like that, if it's more a decentralized thing like a policy document, then you would probably do that from inside of SharePoint. And you've still got the same ability to share documents, comment in them and tag people and that sort of stuff, but you haven't got the kind of chat which comes with Teams around it. It's a lot easier to work with metadata, which is essentially tagging of documents in the SharePoint user interface, than it is in Teams. And this is where we can see things like we can tag a document with a review date or an approval date, for example, or a certain type of category, or say this is a what ISO accreditation this document relates to, or what area of the business this relates to. So you can tag using metadata as well. And that's just all part of this overarching document lifecycle management features of SharePoint. Again, it integrates directly with Office. You can see here Word documents. I can go into new and I can create a brand new document. Also, I've got mobile accessibility. So something else as well that I really feel like people are missing a trick with is that there is a free, from Microsoft, out of the box SharePoint mobile app which you can access SharePoint through. So go and have a look. It's great, especially if you're going to use a lot of the news features. So you push out news articles and things like that. It's a great place to sort of catch up on things within there. But you can also access, of course, documents and some of the other key features of SharePoint. It is a centralized document repository, so as I say, having all our documents in a single place, but it's also scalable and customizable, so we can add more columns, we can add more tags, we can change the view, so we can filter to say, show me documents past a certain review date, or we can use even conditional formatting, like here where things which are past a certain date, we could get them to go red, and things like that. So it's all nice and customizable. I'm just going to jump in and just show you more than anything, rather than a lot about how SharePoint works. I just want to show you the user interface of SharePoint so you can kind of get a little sense of what it looks like in here rather than accessing the documents via Teams. So here's a little sample of our control document system that we've got built in SharePoint. As you can see, I'm not going directly into documents of SharePoint. I've got a nice little home page here, so I can jump into specific documents or policies related to ISO 27001 or 9001. I can see all policies. I can see admin links, which could show up if I was an administrator of this. So I can see documents which are close to review or needing to be approved. I could also drill down and I could see documents maybe based on the area of the business, so IT operations or commercial or human resources. As I click into that, I could then jump into this and it could drill me down further into the content. So policies related to recruitment or staff handbooks or equal opportunities. And then I can drill down to that. And again, this is the pages experience which is coming from this. So it's not just a big pile of documents. We've actually architected a set of pages to drill down into. Now I'm into the equal opportunities policies area, and I can see who's a policy owner, maybe a bit of a video about it, useful links that relate to this, as well as the actual documents which sit in the background of SharePoint, which I'm going to come on to talking about in a second. We could embed things like Microsoft Forms or questionnaires and surveys to actually sort of poll people or test their knowledge as well on this. Again, all of this is sort of the built-in control document system that we're looking at. But I'm just going to jump into the documents area because essentially all of the kind of core policies are documents in the background. And you can see this is what the user interface looks like. So I can create a new document by clicking on new and then click on Word in here. I can upload documents, go into files or folders, and I can see my documents appearing in here. I can open up a document simply by clicking on it and it opens up a new tab and it's opened that document for me then. Obviously, this is just a test dummy document, so that's why it's full of rubbish. But it's opened up in Word Online, which is another tab inside of my computer. But I could actually choose if I wanted to, I could open up the desktop version of the app as well. It's very similar. There's not a huge amount of difference between the look and feel of it. But hopefully you can see now this is what kind of SharePoint would look like through a browser, accessing it, and that just gives you a bit of a comparison then of what this looks like compared to when we're looking at it through the sort of eyes of a Microsoft team. So those are the key features of SharePoint for document storage. So let's jump in and talk a little bit now about understanding Microsoft Teams. So what is Microsoft Teams? It's essentially a collaboration set of tools to communicate and work together. So it lends itself really well to like project teams, department teams, anyone who's sort of collaborating on working together on something. It's allowing you to have centralized chats, conversations, as well as meetings and file sharing. A lot of people actually still, even now to this day, only think of Microsoft Teams as a kind of meeting tool, like via Outlook, almost like the equivalent of a Zoom sort of call. But actually, it's much more than that. You can have collaboration which lasts weeks, months, years, maybe even around a particular topic or department. It seamlessly integrates with SharePoint. Now, I did allude at the beginning to this, that actually Teams is kind of like sat on SharePoint from a file perspective anyway. So when you click on the Files tab inside of a Microsoft Team, you're actually seeing a view of SharePoint, a cut down view, but it is SharePoint essentially. And that's because a Microsoft Team creates a SharePoint team site. Now I've got a nice little actual chart, a little infographic that I'm going to pull up in a minute, which explains what is actually the background of a team and how it gets there. So that will make a bit more sense later on. But you might have already heard that actually the Files tab is SharePoint, and that is the case. but it's just a cut down version of it. Now, Microsoft Teams is a way of organizing discussions and project-specific channels. So we've also got the ability to create what we call channels inside of Teams. So I'll touch on that when we go through into a little demonstration in a second. But essentially, you can split out and say, okay, well, this is my, say, finance team, and we've got our kind of finance chats and things going on, but we might have a sub-area, sub-chat, a sub-channel area for, say, payroll. So say, for example, there's 10 finance team members, but only 2 of them ever get involved with payroll, then actually maybe we limit that. So we only allow those 2 people in there. So you can do that using the channels. It enhances team productivity with task assignments and deadlines. So you can also use the planner lists, and there's all sorts of other plugins that you can use inside your teams to help boost team productivity. You can also enable external guest access. So we touched on this a little bit earlier when we were talking about SharePoint external sharing sites. You can also do this with Teams as well. So you can bring people in, guests into your Teams if you want to collaborate and work on something together. So at Valto, we often do this for larger projects where we're working with our customers and they're wanting to kind of collaborate and work with us on a daily basis on what's going on, and coming up with ideas and feedback and that sort of stuff. So we create a team, we bring them into that, and we have that kind of centralized chat area. And it also provides a unified space for document storage. So for that particular topic, whether it's a business unit, a department, a project, whatever it is, you can then put all of your kind of documents which relate to that into one space, which makes it much easier to find everything as well. So you've got all your conversations, all your chats in one space. So when to store documents in Teams? So from this perspective, team-focused collaboration requiring rapid communication. So there's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially what we're saying there is if you're working on something and you need to be able to collaborate, you want to get feedback on it, you need to be able to ask questions, people to be able to give you ideas, Teams is a place to put that. It's projects requiring real-time document collaboration. So if you're working on something and you're maybe going to quickly spin up a call and say, well, what do you think about this? I've added this, I've changed this. What do you think? Teams is a much more dynamic way of working. And it provides that dynamic content needing frequent updates and revisions, as well as short-term documents relevant to ongoing discussions. So if you've had a meeting, you drop something into the chat area. Also small-scale document storage within specific channels and rapid access to shared files during team meetings. So you'll be in a meeting and quickly say, oh, there's a file which we worked on this week and I'm going to share that and blah, blah. It's instances where document sharing aligns with chat discussions and informal or ad hoc collaboration on smaller scale documents. Temporary or working drafts need quick team feedback, and what you tend to find is that you could be working on drafts inside of Teams, like a new policy or a new something like that, and at the point everyone said, yeah, this is great, we want to push this out now to the wider organization. That's when it transitions from being a file which is stored within inside of your team, and it's then transitioned into your SharePoint intranet, which is then opened up for everyone to be able to access that file. Also, documents associated with ongoing team tasks or projects. Again, it makes it much easier to have that all stored in one place with an agreed folder structure. So, what are some key features of Teams for document storage then? So, the first is integrated file sharing, so a centralized space for storing and accessing files within channels. So it means, if you look here, this is just a little example of a real team that we have, and we have a lot of different channels in here, some of which are what we call shared channels. So you can see here, we've got this little symbol, which means it's a shared channel, which means it doesn't actually live under this team, but I have access to it because I'm a member of the customer team. So Estimates and Quotes is actually owned by our sales and marketing team. Not everyone's a member of that, so they wouldn't necessarily see that, but they would see Estimates and Quotes. Same with marketing as well. That lives under sales and marketing, but not everyone is in sales and marketing. But marketing is where we can kind of put requests if somebody wants something creating. And same with sales as well. Some sales-related chats and things which are going on, but it's not going to have the full access to the sales and marketing team. So that integrates nicely in terms of when you click on one of these channels and you go to files, each of these channels have their own unique set of files and subfolders which live beneath them. Teams also provides real-time collaboration. So you can do this in SharePoint as well, but you tend to find people use it more from inside of Teams. So it's allowing you to simultaneously edit a document, which is often referred to as co-authoring, at the same time. And you can actually see when you're editing a document and somebody else is editing it, you can see like a little symbol of their name appears across the top of the document. Also, you would see like them typing on a little icon inside of the document as well. It also gives you chat-based access, so you can have quick sharing and access to documents within a chat conversation. So you can quickly say, oh, quickly have a look at this, and you can add the file to that chat. Or even something else I'll show you in a minute is actually you can create a brand new conversation from a file. So you could actually be working on a file and then think, actually, I need to get some feedback on this. I need someone to look over this for me. So I'm going to create a brand new conversation from this file, and you can start that up. Channel access, so we've talked a bit about controlling who has access. So different people can have different access to different areas, which then in turn will control who has access to the files in those areas. We have mobile accessibility. So again, there's a dedicated Microsoft Teams app. And to be honest, it's sad to say, but it's probably in the top 5 apps that I use on a daily basis on my mobile phone, because it's much easier for me to quickly jump in and out of chats and conversations, or ask someone for a progress update or something like that, just whilst I'm out and about, maybe between meetings, pull up my phone, and go, oh yeah, okay, cool, where's this up to? Send a little chat message, blah, blah, blah. I use it all the time, probably just as much as I would use something like WhatsApp or something like that to contact my friends outside of work. So think about having that on your mobile phones. It can be really useful. As I say, creating a conversation, I'm going to show you that. I'm going to show you that now as part of this kind of demo. So let's just jump in and take a look at what Microsoft Teams looks like from a file storage point of view. So I've jumped into Microsoft Teams now. This is the experience through the app on my desktop, but again, you can get to it via web browser, or you could get to it via mobile app as well. There's a load of spam on here, so just ignore all this because it's all just from testing and demo purposes. But what I'm interested in is by going into the Files tab of this Teams, and now we can see what these files look like inside of Microsoft Teams rather than inside of SharePoint. You can see we can still add in columns and things like that. And in fact, actually, if we wanted to, we could jump directly into SharePoint by clicking on this Open in SharePoint button, which will then show me what this looks like. Now, this is actually the team site, the SharePoint team site, which sits in the background of this Microsoft team. So these are all the files and folders that I can access through the SharePoint view. But it is just a Microsoft team at the end of the day. Now, I can create brand new files and folders in here as well. So you can see new Word documents, PowerPoints, things like that. So I'm going to say new document. So I'm just going to call this, let's just say this is 2024 budgets and forecasts. Something like that. Click on create. And then by jumping into this, you can see I can work inside of the Word document, and I'm still inside of Teams. You've still got the bar on the left-hand side, you've still got the search bar across the top. I'm in Teams. I've not left Teams. I'm still creating this document inside of Teams. I can always click on edit, and I could choose to open in a browser, which would open in Word Online, like the default of SharePoint Online. Or I can click on open in desktop app, which is going to open it in the kind of full-fat version of the application on my desktop computer as well. Again, it's a little bit kind of like Marmite in terms of whether people like working documents inside of Teams or not. You tend to find people sort of like sit on either side of the fence. My personal opinion is I wouldn't create a file and work on inside of Teams. I just find, I don't know quite what it is. I'm maybe a little bit old school in terms of the way I kind of work on my Word documents, but I wouldn't do that. I tend to find it's a little bit, the user interface doesn't quite fit how I kind of work. But I would review someone else's document inside of Teams. So if somebody sent me a document and said, can you have a cast your eye over this, maybe add a couple of comments or something like that, then yeah, just for how quick and simple it is, I would do that. If I was building a document from scratch though, personally, and this is just a preference, you don't have to, but I would click on this open in desktop app and I would work on it inside of the Word app directly on my desktop computer. So let's just say this is my file now. You can see all the kind of tabs across the top. They are pretty much the same. So I can say this is my document. blah, blah. It's just good to just have a bit of test text in here. And then we've got that file ready to go. So now I've got my document created. There's a couple of things I might want to do with it. So if I close out this document, you can see I've done this demonstration quite a lot of times before, so I've ended up with loads of tabs across the top. But if it's a document you want to quickly come back to or share with the team, selecting it and then clicking make this a tab, you can automatically then add that document as a tab across the top up here. So by then, you can see I've done this quite a lot, but I've now got this 2024 budgets and forecast. I can jump directly into this document from anywhere. So it could be in my conversations area of my team, or I could be in one of these other tabs, and then I can jump directly into, that file without having to navigate through loads of files and folders and things like that, because it's a tab across the top, creating this kind of one-stop shop for my files. I could also create a brand new conversation from it. So it might be, say, for example, the subject is 2024 finances, and I can say, hey, or whatever. It probably wouldn't be that informal. Hey guys, check out this. But whatever it is, we can just put a bit of text in here, and then I can attach the file. So I can browse teams and channels. It's going to jump into the files of this team's channel automatically for me. I might want to actually just filter by newer to older, modified, and then find the file, click on attach, and then that's then created by clicking on post, a link directly to that. So again, people can have conversations around this. What do you think? And they can jump into it by clicking on that link and going directly into that file directly from the conversation. So that makes it much easier then to start that collaboration process. So those are all the key features of using Microsoft Teams for document storage. And I actually stole the idea from this slide from the ESPC conference that I went to. There's a great presentation that was talking about how SharePoint and Teams kind of works together, and actually I thought this was a great, and I'm going to do my best now to try and explain to you how this is structured, because a lot of people get confused about what the relationship between SharePoint and Microsoft Teams is, and I thought that this slide really encapsulated how it's put together. So if you imagine, and this is more for technical people, so apologies if you're not technical people, just give me 2 minutes, because I'm just going to try and explain the best I can for technical people how this is structured, so it makes a little bit more sense when you're coming to architect your team structure and you know what it's going to do in relation to SharePoint. So the first thing is we have a classic team SharePoint site. So you can have a standalone SharePoint site, which is just a team site, which is not the same as a SharePoint. I talked about department sites, it's not the same thing. A SharePoint department site is actually usually a communication site, and there's only two different types of SharePoint site. You've got a team site and you've got a communication site. Everything I was talking about earlier about intranets and things like that, that's using the communication site. But you can have a team site, which is like specifically for, why here it says any scenario where you want to collaborate with others. The addition of Microsoft 365 groups for security management provides an easy way to control access. So essentially, this is essentially the SharePoint team site, and that's all it is. It doesn't do anything else. And actually, this bit of text shouldn't be here. I know for version 2 of this presentation, I'll remove that. That text should just be underneath this, because the next step of this is what Microsoft are being referred to as groupify. So it's groupifying them. So you're then adding a Microsoft 365 group. Now you can add a Microsoft 365 group to your SharePoint team. So you can do that from SharePoint. The next step from that is once you've got your 365 group with your team, so if you've created a 365 group, it would automatically create a team. You can then teamify it by adding a Microsoft team to the 365 group. So this is where you get then your Teams connected parent team site. So then you've got your team and it has a standard channel. So Teams or Teamify in SharePoint. Why? Enhance your collaboration with real-time chat and meetings. So at this point, we've now got SharePoint and we've got Teams together. But further confusion, and if you're with me so far, thank you. But further confusion comes from then where the channels come into things. Because then within channels, you've got the ability to have private channels. And private channels actually create subfolders within inside of your team, which are controlled essentially with almost like permissions, so that people only see those areas. So if in fact actually the way it's structured, it's not even a folder. It actually ends up being its own dedicated SharePoint site. So that's why it's broken out. And I told you it gets a bit confusing. And the same goes with shared channels as well. So these are only created from inside of Teams, and they're to collaborate with internal or external users on Teams. But again, it doesn't create. I've messed up how I've explained this, but it doesn't create a subfolder within inside that team when you're creating private channels. It creates actually a dedicated SharePoint site to split away. So it doesn't have folder level permissions, it has site level permissions. So hopefully I've not butchered that too much. Quick summary: standalone SharePoint site with a Microsoft 365 group, a team associated to a SharePoint site that has a 365 group, and then the channel sites and the shared channels, they create dedicated SharePoint sites per private channel that you create. And let's not forget Viva Connections. So you can embed your SharePoint intranet into Microsoft Teams. With Viva Connections, it's a personalized gateway into Microsoft Teams, aggregating company news, resources, and communications for seamless employee experience. It will create a centralized hub within Teams, enhancing connectivity and engagement by providing easy access to company information and fostering collaboration. So that kind of intranet portal that we talked about in SharePoint, you can embed that into Teams. So we're sort of blurring the lines again of where SharePoint and Teams kind of exists. So you've got your SharePoint Internet Communications site, which is then branded up as Viva Connections, which is then injected into Teams as a tab that you'd be able to access on the left-hand side of Teams, which would load a little bit like this. And there's some nice designs and stuff that comes along with Viva Connections. So we've talked about SharePoint, we've talked about Teams. So as a quick high-level recap about all these three, SharePoint is centralized document management. It's large-scale, structured for storage. You can also build out complex workflows, but it's really about being company-wide. It's long-term content that's organized in a secure way, which is all full of useful company-wide resources. Whereas Teams is for collaboration. It's about immediate communication, quick collaboration, and project-based work. It's real-time chat and meetings. It's about swift discussions, decision-making, and task coordination. And the final third piece of the puzzle that we've not really talked much about is OneDrive, which is for individual file management. So for personal storage, for individual work and file sharing. So for any documents you are personally working on, building, but nobody else really needs access to it. Although you can, again, gets a bit confusing, but you can share a file from your OneDrive with anyone you like. But you tend to find that if it is a document that you're constantly sharing, or the types of things you're sharing out, it probably should live inside of Teams because it's collaboration. But if you don't need that, then it can live in OneDrive. If it then becomes a document which everybody in the whole organization should be able to read, like maybe you're working on a policy on your own and you're going to publish it out, then you would transition it into SharePoint. Again, OneDrive has its own mobile app from an accessibility to files across devices for personal use. When I say personal use, it's personal work use, essentially. But I really do advocate people make the most of OneDrive because everybody gets up to 1 terabyte of storage space as part of their license, which is tons. And if you think of a sort of a small, medium-sized business, they probably only have a few terabytes of SharePoint and Teams space combined. Every single SharePoint site, every single team combined. Typically, for most organizations, I say they would have only a few terabytes of storage space because it's all based on the licenses you have and it pulls together all of that into space. But say, for example, that might be an organization of, say, 200 employees, which has that kind of space. But in reality, they have 200 terabytes of OneDrive space potentially floating around. that they can use. Now, some people say, oh, great, can I reallocate those resources from OneDrive to Teams and SharePoint? No, you can't. It's only per user that they have those terabytes. But you can see how if somebody was to misuse where their files live, and they put all their drafts and they put all of their kind of things that nobody cares about inside of Teams or SharePoint, you'd quickly max out. If everyone was doing that, you'd quickly max out the storage space that you have allocated for every single SharePoint site and team combined. OneDrive is your dumping ground for all of your rubbish and things that nobody else really cares about, and drafts and assets you're using as part of building out presentations and all that sort of stuff. So, what are some best practices then for using SharePoint and Teams? So I would strongly recommend make clear rules for when to use each, as in SharePoint and Teams, and even OneDrive to that extent. Create some materials around that and share that with your organization so everyone's clear, crystal clear, what is SharePoint used for, what is Teams used for, what is OneDrive used for. And in fact, actually, if you contact us afterwards, we have a couple of infographics as well that I didn't put into this PowerPoint, but we do have a few infographics that you can share with people, which explains the difference between Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive and when to use them. So you could take them, rebrand them up, or whatever you'll want to do, and you can share them in an organization. So let us know and we can share them with you. Create a SharePoint hub site for your intranet for all company-wide published documents. Don't have just a team which is available for everyone to access all the dumper stuff. Try and make it a bit more of an experience. Try and make an intranet. Maybe use Viva Connections, as I say, to engage it into Teams if you're going to become a Teams first type of organization. And then also talk often about changes to files in Teams chats or channels. So when you're using Teams, try to avoid then sending an email to someone to say, oh, go and look at the changes I made on this or something like that. Or waiting till you have a physical meeting with someone. Use Teams, right? Use it to chat, use it to send someone a link to a document, create a conversation with it and say, hey guys, what do you think of this document that I'm working on that changes have been made to? And then add SharePoint files into Teams as tabs for quick access. So we looked at that before. So again, making it nice and easy, that seamless integration. We want to remove steps where possible to make people's lives easier. Cool. So a quick case study, just what one we've been recently talking about. We've been working with North Wales Fire and Rescue to help them go through this sort of transitional journey of having a modern SharePoint intranet. So they underwent Valto's comprehensive one-day workshop, which is essentially 1 day working together. We split out over multiple sessions. It doesn't necessarily always have to happen just on one full day. We can split it out into multiple sessions if we needed to, which results in a roadmap for a successful intranet deployment as well as adoption. North Wales Fire and Rescue Service was able to quickly implement a new SharePoint-based intranet with support from Valto to make sure that that was actually fully deployed, people were trained and adopted, and there was a kind of train-the-trainer type of approach that we took for that as well. Valto also deployed our custom control document system that we talked about during this webinar early on, which is one of our products which goes directly to SharePoint. It's all built with native SharePoint and Power Automate. There's no custom code which might break or anything like that. And also their intranet was used to maintain key documents, including policies, procedures, and forms, which actually they struggled with because a lot of the people that worked for their organization had to travel to specific locations and things like that to get access to certain information, documents, and that sort of stuff. So this SharePoint intranet really helped that. It provided a lot more information in real time and made it nice and accessible wherever the users were. It meant that they can gain enhanced access as well, streamlined workflows, improved internal communications as well using this intranet. So talking a bit about the workshop that we do. So what we do as part of this process is we offer a SharePoint and Teams workshop, which is to help your company understand SharePoint as well as Teams and all the products available within Microsoft 365. The day will go through your current situation. So where do your documents currently live? How are they structured? Are they in Microsoft 365 yet? Are they on a file server? We look at the licensing that you currently have. We can always find ways of actually reducing licensing costs. It's very surprising how often people are overpaying for their licenses. So have a conversation with us. we can more than likely find ways of reducing that for you. And we can outline the key objectives you'd like to achieve from using things like SharePoint and Teams. And that outputs a workshop report that outlines the following key areas. So the overall objectives for what you want to do with SharePoint and Teams, creates a rollout strategy for each of the product sets, roadmap including timelines and key dates of when things are going to be delivered, who we're going to need to work with, and what you can be doing to prepare for along the way. A phased approach for project as well as fixed pricing. So everything we do is fixed priced. So we can give you a fixed price to say this is what it'll be to deliver it and what we're going to do. The starting point for this is the workshop, which is at the time of recording is £1,500 British pounds. And as I say, that comes with a full day's worth of time working with you. It comes with a full day's worth of time writing up the report, and multiple calls between that just to sort of finalise and check in and do those things. So if you're interested in that, you can use that contact us, which is the hello@valto.co.uk, and we can book in a call to discuss that with you and how we can approach that. So I just want to thank you for your time joining us today. I say if you've got any questions or you'd like any support in deploying, rolling out SharePoint and Microsoft Teams, please contact us today. Thank you very much for your time.